we are going to do the interview with Councillor Radha Burgess, who's the Deputy Cabinet Member for Digital Strategy, first, and then take Councillor Colley after her. So can I ask Councillor Burgess to come up and take a seat over there? Welcome, Councillor Burgess. Thank you for coming along this evening. As you know, we as a committee agreed at the start of the council year to take a look at the issue of Southwark Council and digital, and that's obviously the area that you lead on. It'd be good if you could give us a kind of 5 minutes or so introduction on the work that you've been doing, the areas you've been looking at, and the kind of things you're looking at doing in the future, and then we'll go into questions. So over to you.
Okay, good. Well, it's great to come to OSC at this stage in the development of our digital strategy. As you know, the strategy document has not yet gone to Cabinet, so I'm really interested in the committee's insights. I know you'll add real value to the work. So we've come up with a vision statement for digital, and it is, as a digital council, we will use technology in our operations and service delivery to improve the lives of people we serve. Now, let's unpack that a bit. We know that digital offers incredible opportunities. It can help us control costs, improve interactions with customers, and better understand what people expect and want from us. We can use business intelligence tools such as analytics to understand how services are performing and make improvements and savings. We can use these tools and big data to help tailor our services so we can deliver more of what people want more of the time. Digital provides us with the means to be more agile and more responsive. It gives us tremendous scope for innovation in local government. It's time to put the customer at the centre of our thinking now. We'll design new digital services from the perspective of how they best work for our customers. As the website is often the very first point of interaction, one major task is its redesign, using simple, plain language and interfaces. Am I in the dark?
No, it's a tactic we use to put people off.
It's good, although I've kept my point.
No, go ahead.
With usability, utility of these new digital services at their heart. And despite how it sounds, going digital is less about IT technologies and hardware, but more about developing a culture internally and externally that embraces digital as the norm. This includes our approach to using digital tools as part of service design and choosing to use digital as a key service point to interact with our customers. The specific technologies we use, for example, BlackBerries, and managing our ability to access them as an organisation, whilst intrinsically linked to digital, will be separately addressed by the technology strategy, which is led by IT. There are, of course, major changes in going digital. Two of the biggest challenges are legacy systems and the sheer scale of change required. We have a large, sprawling portfolio of business applications, I think 300 at the last count, and data, built in a pre-digital era and not fit to support modern online services. We also need to ensure sufficient focus and prioritisation of the change management effort required to make this a success. It's all very well asking staff to get excited about going digital, but if their day-to-day experience of tech or digital channels is frustrating, we're not going to get very far. That's why rationalising our business applications, updating technologies, and investing in digital training internally and externally are so critical to success. We need to inspire staff to embrace digital, to see the opportunities it offers, and how it can positively improve their day-to-day work and through upskilling their careers. Digital exclusion and digital competence are major nuts to crack. While we're very fortunate to live in a borough where 92% of people have online access at home, 17% of them are not confident about performing basic online tasks, so making a payment, sorting out their council tax, etc., etc. We will need to focus resources on digital inclusion and continuing to offer alternative means of accessing information and services to those who may never be able to get to grips with digital. We're supremely aware that incredible opportunities for many can also cause fear and a risk of alienation for others. There are 4 key principles that guide the digital strategy. So the first one is putting the customer at the centre of digital change. Again, it's going back to things being very customer-centric, understanding that services have to be designed not in the way that we've always done them in the past, which we may be quite comfortable with, but really from the perspective of someone using that product or service. Principle 2 is putting digital ways of working at the heart of our organisational culture. Principle 3 is ensuring that everyone can share the benefits of digital change. There's a really critical problem here that we can't have people left behind in this period of change. And principle 4 is to continually improve our services. So it's a really kind of rolling brief, and you know, it's weird to have a situation where we have to set the strategy in stone when actually we know that we're going to need frequent and periodic reviews to be nimble and adaptable, etc. And it's not just about us as a digital council, it's all about creating a digital borough as well. So back to that digital inclusion point and that competency point, how can we further roll out our digital programme to increase competence? You know, how can we support people who are excluded? How can we get them included? And if we can't, how do we provide means of accessing all of our services? We need to ensure our libraries as key community hubs also have that access, they also have that support there to help people. We need to look at places where access is tricky. The Rotherhithe Peninsula is obviously difficult, and I think we're talking to people about how we can help that along. And I think again back to that culture of instead of viewing ourselves as sort of pushing out information, we need to change to viewing digital as a really great tool for properly interacting with residents. So we need to fully use digital channels, including social media, to improve engagement with customers. And we need to think of customers actually as our partners, and that's quite a radical shift that we need to make in terms of mindset. There is an incredible opportunity here for us as a council to transform the services we offer, to transform our internal skills and our relationships with our residents. It will be hard work, it will be very challenging, and it will often be quite frustrating. But ultimately, digital can improve lives and outcomes, and I think that's a prize we can agree is all worth having.
Thank you. I've had a couple of people indicate already. I've got a couple more now as well. Okay, keep your hands up. Okay, Catherine, I'm going to be cheeky and jump in with a question straight away. No need to groan. So, could you just give me an example of the kind of legacy systems, one of the larger scale ones if possible, which we're currently using, which we're signed up to, perhaps we've spent quite a lot of resources on, and which we're going to basically have to now do away with in order to to move to this new way of working which you've described?
Yes, I would like to mention one, but I don't think I can.
Oh, okay.
which is possibly one that might be top of mind in your mind and our minds, but maybe Richard could slightly leap in here.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of applications to choose from.
Yeah.
pick them. I think there are ones that would have a big impact but would be risky, and there are ones that I think may be more achievable. And I think it's important that we keep a momentum.
Yeah.
So I think when we've talked about this on the opposite side, we haven't really had that discussion widely. I think areas around the environment sort of application set would probably be ones we could start to tackle first.
Okay.
You could start looking at other things like the benefits systems, which will probably have a bigger impact, but things like universal credit and how that has to bed in, I think we would want to sort of back off of that as an initial hit.
Okay, just forgive my ignorance. You say the environment application set. What kind of applications are you talking about?
So these are tools like Confirm, which is used to record cases that are dealt with in terms of in environment relating to things like pest control as well. So it's all the systems that we get in, and then they sort of hand it off straight into the back office system. And each of these are often duplicating functionality that you have in our customer relationship management system.
Okay. So presumably then a big strand of the work that you're going to be doing is to do with procurement. Be familiar to everybody on this committee. So I'll bang on about it again. But so presumably a big part of that is what are we now buying in, and is it going to be usable in the future given what we're trying to do?
Yes, that's right. And one thing that actually came up in some of our discussions was that just as Councillor Pollock is doing some work with the architectural supply chain and looking at actually how you can transform the delivery of council housing by being more nimble in your procurement and being able to use smaller suppliers and be able to look at having different kinds of contracts, so you're not kind of embedded in, you're not locked in with enormous suppliers for an unfeasible length of time. So I think that's something that we're very interested in looking at, and again using maybe more suppliers, more contractors, but smaller ones that might be more nimble, more agile.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. Anu.
Thanks very much. Nice to meet you as well. I just wondered, I suppose, a couple of things. Firstly, you mentioned the technology strategy is separate. So just if you could explain what that means, because it sounds great, and I agree with most of what you've said, but as somebody who's spent the afternoon trying to get on the internet in this building and getting more and more frustrated. Sorry, I'll
straight. This is why we're doing this first. Straight into me.
Well, all I wanted to know from Radha, you don't necessarily need to come up here, and all I was going to say is who's responsible for that, and if the answer was you, then I would have picked that up with your questions. The second thing is just really, you mentioned about broadband in Rotherhithe, and you said it's being helped along. What does that actually mean? Because that's a real issue. And the third point is just, because I don't really understand how Deputy Cabinet members work, what actually you do as part of the strategy, when the strategy will happen, how you're involved in that. So not being personal, but just trying to understand your role versus the role of officers.
Yes.
So and I'm fine if there's overlap, as there inevitably is. It's fine. It's just whichever bit is relevant to you. Just go ahead and answer on that.
I mean, the answer is that we work extremely closely together as a team, and that's how Cabinet members and Deputy Cabinet members do work, should work, and I've always worked with every Deputy Cabinet member that I've had, Councillor Williams, Councillor Crine and Councillor Burgess. So we work extremely closely together, but the technology strategy that Radha refers to particularly relates to the technology procurement process that we have coming up. We might go into that a bit later, but I'm sure
that's what I'm just trying to understand. So it sits with you,
about
basically.
That. It sits more with myself than with Councillor Burgess, but they are just completely intertwined, and that's a big part of why we're going to be taking a report on IT procurement in February at the same time as the digital strategy, because it would be ridiculous if these two things were not being developed hand in hand and together with that.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, absolutely. As I said, they are intrinsically linked, but they do need separate kind of strategies. And obviously, if our ambition is to have a truly kind of digital culture, at its very basic, that does mean that we need to be able to use our devices properly. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could collaborate on documents, for example? So there are all
Just be able
those.
to turn the BlackBerry on.
Well,
Yes, I didn't do that this morning either.
Indeed. So yes, they are intertwined, but they do require a kind of separate roadmap, actually, and that's what's happening here.
And the other questions about broadband and about your particular role?
Well, I think that we are talking to a couple of ISPs.
You know, broadband is me again. Broadband.
Oh, okay.
So it's in the digital strategy, but it's myself. We have a working.
I don't mean
party
the council's broadband.
No, I mean the Rotherhithe
Yeah.
broadband. That now sits with me. I think there was a bit of confusion for a while. It's out with the leader, and then he's now delegated that.
Okay, so that's not part of the digital either.
Me. It's there within the digital strategy to ensure that.
So what's happening?
You know, that there's high-speed broadband. We're in discussions, particularly with BT Openreach, who are committed to expanding their provision in that area.
How long have we been in discussion with them?
It's been about since the end of last summer, and we've got a working party which includes officers from BT Openreach.
Does it include either of you?
Yes, it includes. It certainly includes me. I've been
Includes you. So that's under digital rather than Fiona.
No, I'm on
both.
Okay, so you're both
teamwork,
on it.
teamwork,
Both
isn't
on
it?
it. Yeah, no, I just
I don't attend.
No, I'm just trying to
all the
understand
time.
that. So if I had an issue, which of you I would contact about it?
Either. Both.
Okay.
And the last question about the role of Deputy Cabinet.
Yeah, so the Deputy Cabinet Member will, generally speaking, and certainly in this case, sort of set out the broadly speaking, the kind of the idea, the role really, and provide strategic direction. And officers are obviously there to, contribute to that. And
So how much time a week would you spend on it?
Oh, I don't know. We have weekly team meetings, so
So at least one meeting a week.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Tom.
Thanks, Gavin. Just something I didn't really get into in the intro, but I know is very important to both of you, is around cost savings of digital. It's my understanding that digital provides, in terms of contact with members of the public, customers, is a much cheaper way of doing things. So how are we able to incentivise those who could use digital but choose to use phone or face-to-face in order to make this the most easy contact? Well, I mean, personally, for me, digital I would regard as the most easy form of contact, but how do we nudge people or make sure that our systems make it the easiest way so that they want to go there rather than are pushed that way?
So a huge strand of this is designing services in such a customer-centric way that people actively choose to use them. So, the jargon is digital by choice. It's got to be so much easier for me to, for example, today buy a visitor's parking permit online than it is to use any other method. And I'm glad to say that, oddly enough, it was. And that hasn't been the case in the past. So I think it's partly service design. There's a piece, obviously, of communication and marketing and kind of social media around all the different tools that people can use in order to fulfil the things that they need to do, pay council tax or whatever else. For us, this is so incredibly compelling because if you look at just the numbers around what it costs us to have a kind of face-to-face contact, it's something like, £10, something £10.53 or something. Managing a phone query is about £6.45p. And an online self-serve, so doing all those things online, is about 8p. So the arguments for doing this stuff, just from a kind of financial position, are incredibly compelling. And I can get you precise figures on what it actually costs us, but I think that that has to guide us, but it's mostly about designing services properly and letting people know that they're there.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. It was a very interesting introduction. I was really pleased that you said the key is not technology, it's developing a culture that embraces digital as the norm. I think I really strongly agree with that. I'd like to ask you a bit more about your plans for digital communications, specifically social media and Twitter, because I think there's a missed opportunity at the moment for the council to communicate much more effectively through social media. I mean, with the greatest respect to those who run the account, I think at the moment it could be a more useful customer service query point. I have contacted them, for example, with certain queries and like with a photo or something that was particularly easy to do through Twitter, and been told to email the council with this, and I'm sure residents have similar responses. I think it could be used if we have better trained social media officers who can handle customer service queries. That could be good. So I'd just like to know if you can talk a bit more about your plans for digital communications,
I mean,
particularly social media.
I mean, I agree with you. I think social media is quite evidently incredibly important. I actually think that on quite a number of levels we do quite well. If you do some benchmarking and look at other councils, maybe even councils quite nearby, I think we actually we do it better. And I think that when there are teams that are really kind of, when you have a comms team who's really passionate actually about one bit of work that we're doing, they are on fire. So when I did the Women's Safety Charter, they were all over it. They, you know, people were storifying it, you know, they were retweeting it, you know, it had a huge amount of traffic, it became really high profile. So the danger is that it can be quite patchy, and so it's not really consistent. And I suppose that, you know, going back to the wider strategy, we need to ensure consistency across a number of areas, and we need to make sure that actually individual services aren't left behind, or one isn't more successful than another simply because you've got more people in one service that are more passionate or skilled or whatever. So I think we need to be quite even about getting everyone up to speed. I think we could communicate much better.
Can I just ask, how is the Twitter account currently run? Because I have no sense of that.
I've only interacted it through the comms team, so I don't know.
I think there's people from customer services monitoring it as well, aren't there, Richard?
What's the password?
There are some officers in customer experience who can control their Twitter accounts. We do have multiple accounts through social media. The majority of our social media work is outbound comms for events, but we do receive lots of customer service queries through social media accounts, and they channel through to our customer services.
I mean, I think actually, you know, if we want to be really successful, it does go back to having conversations with residents and having proper kind of back and forth. So I, in sheer frustration, when a resident who reported a burst water main on their street and could not for love or money get hold of anyone from Thames Water, and I eventually tweeted at them, and to my mind they handled it completely badly, in the sense that they replied to their head of public affairs, sought me out and said, I will fix Grace's Road, don't worry. And so my complaint had gone out there, public affairs came back to me, and then they failed, and when I said thank you very much for sorting this out, they didn't reply to me. So it's just, you know, we can't waste opportunities like that to actually publicly show that we're resolving issues. You know, so it is about that interaction, and it is about responding to people and, you know, saying we're on it, and, you know, confirming something, we've done something right. We're very bad at doing that kind of thing.
Because I mean, just very quick, they're two very separate things of corporate communications and customer service, but both come through the same conduit, so you need an effective way of doing it.
I don't necessarily, though, agree that I would see Twitter long-term as an ideal sort of customer service digital solution. What I want is for our website to be so easy to use on people's mobile phones that they can very easily report things through that, because what it doesn't do is cut out the middleman and save the cost in the same way. You know, having people from customer experience monitoring Twitter and picking up customer services off Twitter, rather than people self-serving through our website, a website that works, you know, and is designed first and foremost to work well on mobile phones would be just much better for us, deliver far more savings, and really is, I think, more my priority than having, just a duplicate channel.
Because people are going to use it whether you like it or not. That's the thing.
Yeah, I agree, but I wouldn't necessarily want
No,
to
that's
be pushing
last
that as a
one.
way for people to access our services.
Right, I'm gonna. Tom, I'll come back to you in a little bit if that's okay. One quick one then, very quick.
Very quick one.
Yeah.
A lot of talk about Twitter, but what other social networks do you think are important for accessing people of different age groups and different backgrounds?
Yeah. We do Facebook. I'm not sure we do it quite as well actually as we do Twitter, and it probably isn't catching anyone who's like 20. I don't know whether how much we use things like WhatsApp, but that would be incredibly important as a channel to use. So I think we ought to, explore whether we want to do that. I saw some figure the other day about digital spend, and it's extraordinary how much spend there is on products like WhatsApp, and there's another one. But yeah, we should.
As well,
yeah, exactly. Snapchat.
Okay. Maisie.
Great, thanks, Kevin. One is just a clarification, one's a question. The clarification was just to take it back. Sorry if it was just me that didn't quite get it, but this idea of these hundreds of business applications, I didn't really quite in my mind have clear exactly what you were referring to. You're talking about internal computer programs that staff use to operate the council smoothly, or are some of these things also external facing? But that was the clarification. The question is the website redesign, really. So do we have a timescale for that? How far are we, and do we have a cost for that? Yeah.
You want me to say that?
Yeah, you should.
So we are progressing very rapidly with the website improvements, and we expect, I think, live in February.
With the new CMS, we've got the new CMS. Content management system.
Yeah.
That's in development, and we're in fact getting training from the product supplier just next week. So we're hoping to have at least a test site up by the middle of February.
So where we are is, rather than having a sort of big bang approach, here's Southwark Council's new website, we will be gradually introducing in beta a number of sections of the website in the new format, which, as Radha has outlined, will be focused around the customer and very much more transactional in nature, and with a complete rewrite of content, so that it really contains the information that customers and residents and businesses want to find, and not the information that we want to give them, which is, I think, how far too many of our pages are currently written. There's been a big piece of work done using the GDS standards of writing for web.
It's government digital services,
yeah.
is it? Yeah, okay.
And making sure that when people search for something, they get that first paragraph that comes up in their Google search, and that actually contains most of the information that they would want. So we're starting with the Revs and Bends team, which has one of the highest volume levels of people coming to our website to access services. So that will be the first section to go into this beta use. So when you come to your website, wanting the Revs and Bends pages, you'll have the option to go to the beta site to test that out and to give feedback on those pages. And we think that will be a major improvement. There's been a lot of work going on with staff across the council, because this is a job that will be for every part of the council to update their pages, to rationalise the number of pages. There are far too many out-of-date pages on the site, and to ensure it is really much more focused, as we've set out, on the customer and people being able to do what they actually wanted to do when they get to the council website.
Okay.
And then that will gradually roll through the year as we move to the new look and feel and the new website.
Joss?
I think it's a really exciting topic area, and thank you for coming along today to tell us a little bit about it. I'm going to try and divide it up to 3 very, very snappy points. You quite rightly identify it's a culture that really needs to be looked at as well. And part of it is looking at how we can make sure that the conversation is reciprocal and it's not just going one way. How do we plan to do that? Or how do we imagine that will play out in the next year or so, or 5 years, or however long the strategy will last? In terms of also, it would be a good way, and it's good that this meeting has actually been recorded and streamed as well, is that, you know, Scrutiny and other parts of the council have been really good in terms of trying to be, you know, on top of it in terms of digital strategy. How do you feel it could really feed into our democracy and ensure that we are ahead of the curve in terms of moving forward, in terms of digital and engaging with some of our residents? And the final point is, unfortunately, with digital strategy sometimes, is that there may be an initial outlay in terms of costs, or in terms of certainly diverting officer time away from their bread and butter activity. But there are long-term gains, and it's, you know, in the long term there's a lot of savings. How do you imagine you or other members of the cabinet will be able to win that argument in terms of making any initial outlay cost or any initial investment in terms of officer or political time?
Good, thank you.
Yeah. How do we have that back and forth, that reciprocal conversation? I think probably it starts with, you know, creating a culture in which we are a kind of trust. Again, it comes back to being a trusted partner. You know, when residents contact us or use our website, you know, they've got to have confidence in that website. And if things are working, people are going to come back to it, and people are going to think that actually this is reliable, this is useful, I can have faith in the council to get things done. So I think that there's a kind of broad culture that we need to create. I think, you know, actually having the conversation means going back to developing more channels where we can communicate to different types of people. So younger people who might be on Snapchat, yeah, why don't we use that as well? I think that we were talking yesterday about community councils, and, you know, Peckham and Nunhead do live stream their community councils. There were people tweeting about it, but we don't have a Twitter handle, for example, for Peckham and Nunhead community
They are
councils.
following Scrutiny's lead, I hope.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe we need one, and you know, so I think that all of that is kind of quite important to communicating better and in a kind of reciprocal way. Secondly, democracy. How's it good for democracy? Well, I think that, you know, it is wonderful that this is being live streamed. It's great for transparency. People get to kind of understand what we're doing. I think, you know, doing that shows enormous leadership, and it's something that we should absolutely continue to do. I'm personally a huge, Fiona might not be, I'm personally a huge fan of open data. Okay. And I think we can do a huge amount in terms of releasing some non-controversial data sets into the wild, as it were. I think that can be incredibly transformative. I think it also really will underscore our transparency and, again, build up that trust between ourselves and residents. So I think that's a really big piece of it. Also, we can, on the subject of data, you know, there's probably a huge amount of work to do in terms of analysing the huge data sets that we have, and really crunching some of that data to get better outcomes for people, to tailor services, and, you know, all of that kind of activity, again, just reinforces people's faith in the organisation and their competence.
Are Cabinet and Council Assembly live streamed?
No, it's assembly shows.
It seems strange. I would suggest that, you know, maybe we would come later on in this process to recommendation. That, you know, some of the sessions that we've had in Scrutiny, some are more viewed than others. I would admit. We're not always busting the ratings, but you know, some of them have got 500 hits or so. You know, it depends on what the issue is, and you know,
how many times you watch it again?
Yeah. now, I would never do that. But you know, frankly, if we got 500 people in a room for any council meeting, we'd be, you know, in terms of engagement, we'd be scared, but we'd be very happy about you know, the levels of engagement. So I think that would be a good thing to do. I'm going to go Paul next.
My question's kind of been asked by Johnson.
Okay. And Rebecca.
I didn't.
No, you didn't indicate.
I didn't
Sorry, there was a big explosion. Is there any other questions at this stage?
The initial outlay.
Sorry, yes. Yeah.
So how do we justify the outlay? I think it probably comes down to we can't afford not to. With if you just take one tiny piece of this, let's say the customer interactions, if you just look at £10 for face-to-face, 8p for online self-serve, it's a pretty compelling argument in the kind of brutal financial context in which we're operating. I think it's our duty to pursue these things.
Yeah, I mean, these are difficult decisions in the context. It's the reason why when we had the budget consultation running through the last round of community council meetings, that we particularly included a question about should we be investing in those upfront costs, even though we are in very difficult times. And I think really every community council came back quite strongly that we should, but we will have some difficult choices to come to as we look at the budget over the next month or so about should we be putting more money into the modernisation and digital development world at the same time that we're having to cut other services.
I think it's also about going back to, I'm keeping banging the drum on a customer-centric philosophy, but it is about getting services right first time, and that in itself provides enormous value for money, and there is a direct relationship between us targeting, tailoring, designing properly, and value for money for residents, and that is the absolute kind of crux of the matter here.
Okay.
And some of it is not as expensive as you would think. I didn't answer the question about how much the website development is costing. I think that's in the tens of thousands.
It's about £23,000.
About £23,000. Now, of course, there is an immense amount of work going on from officers to do that. That is not including that cost. But in terms of the work being done by external contractors, that's the cost. I think the last website improvement cost £1 million.
Wow.
So it's a very good value for money. It doesn't always cost a massive amount to make these improvements.
Interesting. Catherine.
Thank you. I think there's loads of great stuff here. Is there a downside? Is there a downside to taking a very digital approach? Are there people in our borough who we will further exclude, or that might not be the downside, but you've been nodding when I've said is there a downside?
I think it's a concern, and the exclusion piece has to be absolutely top of mind, because in a way we're only as successful as our digital inclusion kind of policies or whatever. So it has to be top of mind. I think that there will be people who really fear this kind of change, whether it's actually just people internally who are quite used to things being done a certain way, and obviously change management is such a critical bit of all of this that we have to take internally, we have to take people with us, and it's quite reasonable actually for people to possibly be resistant to change. In some people's minds, going digital will equal job losses. That is a genuinely worrying thing. It's a distressing thing. So, that's something that we need to deal with properly. Yes, there will always be people who, for one reason and another, cannot get to grips with digital. And we have to absolutely keep them top of mind and make sure that there are facilities that those people can use. I think there's a chunk of people who don't feel that comfortable, but they're not digitally excluded. It's not that they can't use things, but they do need the right incentives, they need the right outreach from us. We need to launch a kind of grassroots, I mean we're already doing it actually, there is a digital inclusion program, but that kind of grassroots activity where we go into TRAs or libraries or wherever else, and really enhance people's skills or try to establish people's skills is going to be critical to the success of this. It's no good if we're serving a kind of digital elite and we're leaving a whole load of other people behind. You know, that cannot equal success for us. You know, we'll have to say, you know, actually we failed if we end up in a situation where people have indeed been left behind. So downside, I don't know, but it is.
You're aware
top
of it.
Of mind,
Yeah, and I think we've got to a point now where being digitally excluded is almost as bad for somebody as being financially excluded, because it isn't just that Southwark Council services are going online. Universal Credit will be an online-only service. Being able to get the best prices and the best deals for your gas and electric increasingly is online only. People are losing out by being digitally excluded, and I don't think we should just accept that. I think we should be helping to motivate people and helping people to understand why it's good for them to become digitally included, and not sort of sitting back saying, oh, we must cater for people who are digitally excluded, we must help them to become included. Albeit that for some people that will be impossible. A tiny minority, that will be impossible. We need to have some backup plans for that.
Ben?
Very briefly, I'm also a very big fan of big data and open government. I wonder if, I'm really intrigued to know what these data sets might be. I don't know if you can quickly give an example, if there's any pilot data you're looking at, and how you're dealing with issues of confidentiality and curation, so the data's really useful and rich.
Well, that is something I'd quite like to hand over to Richard to. On the open data point, I think that there's something really useful that we could do to get people possibly more comfortable with the idea of open data, because lots of local authorities are very shy of that whole thing. It makes them nervous. But you know, if you look at something like school places, that's a really good example.
Or non-residential rents, for example, which we might be discussing later in the agenda.
Okay,
and,
but you know, that's something that would be really worth sort of, you know, looking at and putting it out there and letting people play about it.
Obviously not data about individuals.
But
about catchment area along. Because some of the data that traditionally only appears in next year's admissions booklet, making that available more rapidly.
And also the stuff that individuals do by cobbling together the bits of information they can get from the council, when actually it's nonsense. It is nonsense. It's clearly non-sensitive data, but it's incredibly useful for parents to have, and just being able to do all of that kind of catchment area mapping, and you know, understanding better the you know, the 6 choices thing, you know, whatever else. So that would be something non-controversial, simple, readily understandable. And I know a guy who did the Information is Beautiful books, and I think, you know, if we can get into a mindset where we will happily kind of visualise all sorts of things that people might find quite challenging, like the school place or whatever else. That's again a good way of enhancing trust and just being just a much better partner than we might have been able to be before. But I'll let Richard talk about big data.
Yeah,
and
so
security.
I think you're right to say it's a really exciting area, and I think when the council last looked at tools to do this, was probably getting on for probably 8 or 9 years ago. The technologies were not really as developed as they are now, and as a result, it was a very daunting task to try and do anything with all the disparate data sets that we've got. It looked like it needed a lot of investment and a lot of teamwork to sort of bring it all together. But I think with the tools that are available today, we've got a lot of flexibility around what we can do for very, very low cost, or in many cases no cost, so that you're talking about free tools that you can use. So we've looked at doing some stuff around electoral information, because that's an area where you know, there's a lot of benefits to be gained from making sure you have high quality data. Clearly that is confidential in many cases. You wouldn't want to, for example, shovel that information into the cloud, and we would never do that. But certainly you could anonymise that data and strip out some of the confidential parts to still leverage those tools. equally, because a lot of these tools are free, there's a low-cost option for us which we've looked at about bringing that, bringing those tools in, installing them in our data centre, so nothing ever leaves our control, and using that as a way of starting to feed in different data sets. And it's amazing how within a very short number of minutes, you can, given the right data sets, you can start to graphically see patterns and trends, and use it for better commission to do identification of where the best bang for the buck is.
Yep.
And so I think that must be a big underpinning theme for this strategy. You've got all this data and we're not leveraging it properly.
Okay, thank you. But I'm going to call it close to the questions now. I personally think that probably the best way for us to continue to approach this is to have kind of another bite at the cherry once we've got the strategy in writing. Now, you mentioned at the start, Radha, that the timescales for the publication of the new strategy. When can we expect to see that?
When's it going to Cabinet? End of 9th February?
So imminently, okay.
18th of January is draft reports, I believe. So it'll be a week thereafter in terms of final reports.
Okay, okay. So we might want to consider bringing this back again. I mean, I know we've been to Cabinet by that point because we've got budget scrutiny at the next one, and then we'll be into our March meeting. But there may be some more that we can contribute to the process at that stage. People comfortable with that as a way forward? Okay, thank you, Radha, for coming this evening. Appreciate it. Wonderful. And so it's immediately on to